Okay, so hi, welcome to part 11 of the Metroidvania tutorial series. One of the problems that we have, right, with some of the codes that are in our project is that the codes are not modular. Not very ideal, because what we are doing with these codes is that we are basically writing a script to solve a very specific problem. Instead, you want to build scripts that are modular. Modular means that you can plug them out and you can place them into a different context. When you have scripts that are properly modularized, it becomes a lot easier to fix bugs as well. One of the features that we have in our game is that when you get hit, there will be a brief stop. And this brief stop over here, right, it functions on a totally different script from the game manager's pause. So we have a pause and unpause feature as well. So because it functions in a different script, they both control the timescale variable independently. So where if you pause the game at the same time that you get hit, then the game just doesn't freeze, but it pauses, but then the pause screen doesn't come up. So this is because we have two different scripts that are managing the time scale differently. And if in the future, if we want to add features where we control the flow of time, want to speed up or slow down the flow of time, right, this will cause some problems, because the management of the time.timescale variable, which controls the speed that time passes in the game, is handled by many different variables. So in this part, we're just gonna fix up the game manager a little bit to make it become the timekeepers that not only handles the pausing and unpausing feature, it also handles the pausing that happens or the stop that happens when you get hit. Currently, that is handled by the player controller script under HitStop time. So we're gonna transfer this HitStop time functionality over to Game Manager, and from there we will also add a couple of pieces of logic into the Game Manager to help to manage the time scale in a coherent manner, so that when both of these features interact, they don't cause problems. So for starters, right, before we do that, we actually also want to jump into the Game Manager, and we want to try to get the Game Manager to pause and unpause properly as well. So the Game Manager itself, there are a couple of things that can be improved in terms of the way that we code the pause and unpause features. So let's go over the Game Manager script, and then when we look at the update function, you will see right here, right, in this part of the code, this is where the pausing and unpausing happens. And well, I would say the pausing and unpausing is being done in a way that is less than ideal for two reasons. Firstly, the logic here, well, can be simplified. More importantly, right, you will notice that it's possible to unpause the game, but to pause the game, right, everything is just hard-coded. Why do I say it's hard-coded? I say it's hard-coded because you have a function here that other scripts can call to unpause the game, but there is nothing that you can do to pause the game except to use the escape key. While this is fine when we talk about modularity, right? Modularity is about, again, maximizing the number of possibilities that you have when it comes to coding your game. So with modularity, what we are talking about is, for example, Unity is coded in a very modular manner, right? So you have like a whole bunch of components in Unity that are there, and these components can be very easily attached to any one of the game objects to control their behavior. Good example is the rigid body, or let's say the sprite renderer. Look at the game manager that we have over here, right? That we are not able to pause the game using a function limits the interactivity that the game manager will have. This means that the only way the game is coded to pause is through the escape key. And in the future, if you wanted to modify this feature, it's gonna be a little bit more difficult. So we want to redesign the pause functionality a little bit, make our code a little bit more concise, and make the functions a little more accessible, right? So here are the changes that we make to the Game Manager to improve the pausing functionality. The first thing, the screen here, we are saving the last time scale variable as well. This will be used later on when we implement the HitStop functionality in the Game Manager as well. We use the last time scale variable to ensure that there is no clash when a stop and a pause is happening simultaneously. Now, we're going to remove the unpause function as well and just introduce a pause function over here like this. And this pause function over here is just going to either pause or unpause depending on the variable that you pass inside here. And then we will delete, of course, the unpause game function, and then the extra lines of code over here. over here. Let me just grab this piece of code here, put it into the game manager, and then we'll just run through the codes from my screen right here. So we've added the isPause variable. We removed the game isPause variable. It's just a simple rename. So if you were just manually editing your code, whenever you want to change a variable, I suggest the best way to do it is to just right click on the variable, click on rename, and then you can change the variable like that. Now, so the changes here are that we have added one new variable, last time scale, and then in the unpause function, right, what I've done here is I've removed the unpause function and I've added a pause function that basically does what the old section inside the update function did. So we initially coded the pause and unpause by having a block for when you press escape and the game is unpaused, and when you press escape and the game is paused. There are also a couple of changes that have been made, and it is that there is this fade function over here that you should open your fade UI and then just drop it in. So this fade function basically does the same thing as fade UI out, fade UI in, but then we're adding a new variable here called fade in. If this is true, we are doing a fade in. If this is false, then we are doing a fade out to isPause. So we just have to jump over to our enemy scripts and check that the variable is updated as well. Otherwise, you know, the change of the variable name will affect our scripts. So if you have changed the variable name by right-clicking and changing the name like that, then you will not have to update your player controller or your enemy script. But if you haven't done that, just jump over to both the scripts and make sure that the pause variable is appropriate. It's the appropriate one, right? So now that these variables are set up, the next thing we want to do is we have to update our pause menu as well, because the pause menu has two buttons. So we have our pause menu over here. Let me just hide the scene fader, show the pause. In the pause menu over here, we have two buttons, right? Resume and click the main menu, and grab the game manager here, place it here. So previously we used the unpause game function, right? That's been changed to pause and unpause, so we just have to do this. So when we resume the game, we want the game to unpause. So then you just assign the pause function here and have the checkbox here unchecked. The reason why the checkbox here appears is because the game manager pause function has a pause boolean over here. So we've just got to update the field over here to make sure that the resume button unpauses the game. And let's jump over to, and then after that, we click the main menu over here. We have to make sure that the game manager also unpauses the game. So once all this is done, then we are ready to implement the HitStop in our game. And HitStop is going to be a little bit more complex than the pause and unpause functionality. So next thing you want to do is to create two new functions for our game manager, and the two new functions are stop as well as handle stop game. So what the stop function does, firstly, is static. Why is it static? The reason it's static is so that anywhere in the game when you want to stop time, you can just type in GameManager.stop, and this will stop time for a amount of time, right? So because it's static, we can put it in anywhere. Put it here, we can put it here, we can put it anywhere that we need a stop. So this makes it really convenient for us to use the stop function. And if you do not use the static modifier over here, you can still access the stop function, but then you will have to write a longer line of instructions. Instead of having GameManager.stop, you will have to write GameManager.instance.stop. So what the stop function does is right away it checks whether there is a stop game coroutine. So the stop is going to be managed by a coroutine. Why? Because stop will pause the game for a time, right? And whenever we have things that happen over time, coroutines are always a good candidate for helping to solve our problem. So we want to make sure that every time the game is stopped, the game cannot be stopped anymore. Otherwise, when you stop the game multiple times and you get you get very janky behavior, right? Because every time you stop something at the end of the stop, it will unpause or it will unstop the game. So then we start a code routine here. This code routine is called handle stop game. And the handle stop game code routine basically takes the same arguments that the stop function takes. Notice that the arguments over here are optional to be. So in the handle stop game, what we do is that we save the last time scale, again just like pause, and then we reduce the time scale by the multiplier that we have right here. And then we do a wait for end of frame. What this does is this is just an object that allows us to wait 1 frame in the code routine. Okay, most important part in the code that we have over here is this chunk over here that says when the game is paused. Over here we check it's paused by using instance, because remember we're in a static function and we cannot access instance variables inside a static function. So if the game is paused, then we will just wait for 1 frame and then we will not do anything below. Yeah, otherwise we will set the time scale to whatever the last time scale is, multiplied by the slow multiplier, and then we count down for the duration. So this duration value that we have is over here, and whatever is set here, it keeps counting down all the way until duration is 0. So every frame it just reduces the duration and it freezes the time scale to whatever value that we want until the duration counts down to 0. And when that happens, then we will restore the game back to its last time scale. We will set the last time scale save value to -1 because game is unpaused, right? And then we set the stop game code routine back to now. Alright, so what we have here is that we will have the current time scale. This is the time scale that was there previously. And this will, for example, if my time scale now is 0 because the game is in stop, I want to restore the time scale back to 1 second. So once we have the restore speed over here, we can later multiply this by unscaled delta time to slowly add the value back to the current time scale. Okay, so the restore speed is just here so that we know how much to add to the current time scale every frame. So once this is done and everything is calculated, we will just start adding a little bit of time scale to the time scale variable every frame. Okay, we add it to the current time scale first and then we set the time scale to be equals to current time scale. Okay, number one is before we update the rest of the stuff here under player controller, so to prevent a null reference exception, we can just do a if on health change all back here. It's not equals to null. And then we can do this, or we can just put an exclamation mark in front. This. Okay, we can't do this, so we have to do a roll like that. Yeah, we can remove start time again as well actually. Hit stop time as well and restore time scale. So these are the 3 functions that are gone. Let me explain the other parts of the changes to the player controller as well. So we have removed hit stop time. Other than that, we have also added a little chunk of code over here. I'll explain why this is needed later on. Because when an enemy hits you, right, you will still be able to move because the game is not paused and the game is just in stop. The other thing that we have to do also is to go to our enemy script and we will have to update the hit stop time. Replace it with the GameManager.stop function. Okay, so for the enemy script that is right at the bottom over here, replace the stop time with GameManager.stop. The other thing we want to do is to find the boss launch script and do the same thing. And same thing under THK events. And finally, we have Barrage Fireball. We update this as well. Okay, so there's one more, it's the Diving Pillar. So after replacing all of the hit stop time instances with GameManager.stop, game should work. Okay, so you will still get the same hit stop, but now the hit stops have become a lot more customizable. Okay, so you have a stop like this. Later on, we also apply the stop to enemies. In part 12, we apply this to the, not to the enemies, to the pickups as well. For now, it just applies to the enemies. So depending on how you want to configure your game, if you want to have a more dramatic effect, you may want to not stop the time entirely and just leave time to have still a little bit of leeway to proceed forward with.
You can customize GameManager.stop to allow some animation even during a hit stop by adding arguments to the function. The first argument controls how long the stop lasts for, the second controls the time it takes for time scale to go back to normal after the hit stop ends, and the third controls the percentage time is slowed to. This is how it looks like. To make sure this runs smoothly, however, we will need to make some optimizations to the code.
The two other changes are, firstly, we changed the flip function. Alright, so the flip function, instead of having a rotation, it now just changes the scale like this. So when we are moving left, we will just set the scale to be minus. And then when we moving right, we set the scale to be plus. And notice that we grab whatever the scale is and then just flip the sign. So we just turn this into an absolute value, which turns this positive. So whatever the x value is, we turn it positive, and then we put a minus here to turn it back negative. This is to ensure that the x value is always minus when we are facing left, and then when we are facing right, the x value is always positive. Okay, basically what I'm trying to say here is that when you use the scale, a scale is less expensive than a rotation. That's the first change. Second change in the player controller is a little bit more above. And it's this line over here that we add in to get inputs. And the reason we add this line is because when we stop the game and we don't have this line, what's gonna happen is that when the game is stopped, you can still flip the player around, and you don't want that to happen, right? When the game is stopped, the game is stopped, right? Right. So with all these changes, we should now have a more robust time stopping system. And in the next part of our tutorial, we'll be covering how we can use this new stop system in our inventory and pickups as well.